"You are a pathetic joke, Chloe." The words ripped across the hushed, glittering ballroom, sharper than the crystal chandelier light, aimed directly at the woman standing frozen by the marble fountain. Chloe. The name itself felt like a curse tonight, echoing off the opulent walls of the St. Regis Grand Gala. Chloe felt the world tilt, a dizzying nausea hitting her as every head in the room, a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns, swiveled to lock on her. She hadn't even finished setting down the empty champagne flute she'd been carrying to keep her hands from shaking. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, leaving her lungs starved for oxygen. The voice belonged to Marcus Sterling, her ex-fiancé, a man whose tailored suit and smug smile barely masked the venom in his soul. He stood next to his new conquest, a sleek, oblivious model named Serena, who had just offered him a pitying, saccharine glance before turning her nose up at Chloe. "Look at her," Marcus continued, his voice now a theatrical performance for the entire assembly, a masterclass in calculated cruelty. He gestured toward Chloe with a dismissive flick of his wrist, as if she were a piece of spilled refuse, the same desperate, grasping little accountant who thought she could ride my coattails all the way to a corner office and a mansion in the Hamptons. The same girl who sacrificed her own career, her own life, for mine. The back of Chloe's neck felt hot. She could feel the pinpricks of 1,000 judgment-laced stares. Her dress, a simple, elegant emerald silk that had cost her 2 months' rent, suddenly felt like a scarlet letter. She'd bought it because it reminded her of the future she thought they were building. A future she now realized was only ever a blueprint for Marcus's ambition. "Just walk away, Chloe. Don't give him the reaction he wants." But she couldn't move. Her feet were cemented to the polished floor, her mind trapped in a terrifying loop of flash fragments, a mosaic of the last 5 years of her life, a slow-motion car crash of sacrifices and betrayals, the late nights she spent auditing his first company's books for free, the $50,000 inheritance from her grandmother she'd quietly poured into his flailing startup, a loan he now conveniently forgot ever existed. The way she'd turned down the prestigious fellowship at Columbia to stay in the city, close to him, just so she could be his unpaid secretary, his chief cheerleader, his silent partner, always existing in his shadow. The whispered promise, 5 months ago, right before he dumped her for Serena. "You're too plain, Chloe. Too safe. You don't have the fire a man like me needs to fuel his empire." The memory of that whisper, that ultimate humiliation, was a physical blow. It was the moment she realized she hadn't just lost a man, she had lost herself, piece by careful piece, until all that was left was an empty shell holding a ledger of broken promises. Now, Marcus was escalating. He was leaning into the microphone a DJ had just set down for a scheduled announcement, his voice booming and distorted by the speakers, ensuring his degradation of her was utterly inescapable. "You know what she did when I asked her to leave?" he continued, a cold, mocking laugh escaping him. "She cried, she begged, she reminded me of all her little investments in my company, as if her small, pathetic contribution deserved a slice of my eventual success, as if her tearful pleas held any weight at all." He took a theatrical sip of his drink. "So, for the benefit of anyone here tonight who might feel sorry for this charity case," Marcus announced, his eyes meeting hers, dark with contempt, "let me set the record straight. Chloe is a failure. She's an empty vessel, a reminder of the lower-tier ambitions I thankfully left behind. She is nothing, and she is most certainly not mine." The finality of his rejection, the sheer cruelty of his public abandonment, felt like a physical tearing of her soul. She felt her meticulously constructed mask of composure crack. A single, hot, vulnerable tear escaped and traced a burning path down her cheek. The shame was a crushing weight. She didn't want to beg, didn't want to scream, didn't want to do anything but evaporate into the velvet shadow of the corner. This was the absolute peak of her shame. This was the moment where she was most exposed, most broken, most ready to shatter. She was standing there, the victim of a public execution of her self-worth, and no one, absolutely no one, was stepping forward to stop it. But then, the atmosphere in the room changed. Not a gradual shift, but an immediate seismic drop in temperature and noise. It started with a rustle of heavy, expensive fabric. and the subtle, almost undetectable shift of the crowd parting like water around an immutable stone. The murmurs died. The cynical, pitying stares vanished, replaced by looks of wide-eyed, naked fear. Chloe felt a primal instinct to turn, but something held her, a terrifying magnetic pull, forcing her to stare past Marcus, whose own cruel smile had suddenly, unbelievably, frozen on his face, replaced by a look of sheer debilitating terror. Then, a voice. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't even loud. It was a low, resonant baritone, a voice like the deep thrum of a high-end engine, so utterly calm and steeped in absolute authority that it didn't just command the attention of the room, it stole the air itself. Mr. Forsty too. Mr. Forsenfied Rusta Priabs, Row. Mr. Forsenfied Rusta Priabs, Sterling, the voice said, the name rolling off his tongue with a dangerous silken contempt. You have a fascinating, though rather tedious, definition of nothing. Matteo the architect Moretti stepped into the light. He was lethal beauty in a tuxedo, not just handsome, but devastating. He carried himself with a predatory grace that spoke not of money or inheritance, but of raw, undisputed power. His black hair was slicked back, revealing a severe, aristocratic face, but it was his eyes, deep, obsidian eyes, that seemed to absorb all the light in the room, that held the true danger. They were fixed, not on Marcus, but on Chloe. Matteo Moretti. The name was whispered in every financial district, every back alley, every high-stakes casino. The head of the Moretti Famigula, the true power broker of the eastern seaboard. He didn't just operate outside the law. He operated in a dimension where the law simply did not apply to him. He was rumored to be ruthless, protective only of his own, and utterly unforgiving. Chloe's breath hitched. Why was he here? She was nobody, a former accountant. Marcus, suddenly pale and sweating profusely, stammered out, "Mr. Moretti, I didn't see you there. I was merely, clarifying a personal matter." Matteo didn't even glance at him. His focus was entirely on Chloe, his expression unreadable, though a muscle ticked in his jaw as he noted the tear track on her cheek. He took 2 steps, closing the distance between them, and the world seemed to narrow to the space they shared. He reached out. Chloe braced for a touch, a cruel, dominant touch, but instead his fingers, long and strong, delicately brushed the damp stain on her silk dress where her champagne flute had been resting. His touch was forbidden, electric, and surprisingly, almost gentle. Then he finally turned his gaze, a lethal beam, to Marcus Sterling. "Your clarification," Matteo stated, his voice dropping to a gravelly, chilling whisper that somehow everyone could hear, "is both incorrect and offensive to me. You have chosen the wrong woman to humiliate tonight." Marcus, trembling, tried to protest. "But sir, she..." Matteo lifted his hand, not in a threat, but simply a gesture for silence, and Marcus instantly snapped his mouth shut. The silence was heavier than any shout could have been. Matteo's dark eyes returned to Chloe. He didn't ask her if she was okay. He didn't offer a platitude. He simply slid his arm around her waist, his touch a possessive, scorching brand through the thin silk of her dress. It was a clear, unambiguous statement to the room. It was dominance disguised as a rescue. He pulled her flush against his side, shielding her from the predatory stares. She could feel the hard, unyielding muscle of his body, the faint, intoxicating scent of expensive cologne, and something subtly dangerous, like aged scotch and gunpowder. He looked back at Marcus, his face now a mask of cold, unwavering fury. "You said she was nothing," Matteo stated, his voice laced with pure, terrifying command. "You said she was an empty vessel. You dismissed her contributions, her loyalty, and her very existence." He gave the briefest, almost imperceptible squeeze to Chloe's waist. A secret signal. "You insulted my woman in front of 1,000 witnesses." The air fractured. The lie was monumental, yet the authority with which he spoke it made it instantly, terrifyingly real. A communal gasp echoed through the ballroom. Matteo leaned in, lowering his head until his lips were near Chloe's ear. She shivered uncontrollably, the heat of his presence warring with the icy terror of the situation. "Look at me, Cara," he murmured, The Italian endearment, a thrilling, intimate invasion in the midst of the chaos. Stand tall, you are a Moretti now. They will remember your humiliation for exactly 3 seconds. They will remember mine forever. He didn't wait for her to respond. He lifted his head and spoke to the room, his voice a pronouncement of law. She is mine, he declared, the possessive pronoun, a shockwave. She has always been mine. He didn't need to elaborate. The message was clear. Anyone who touches, insults, or even speaks ill of his possession will answer directly to him. Then, with a casual gesture, he dropped his hand from her waist, only to firmly take her small, cold hand in his large, warm one, lacing their fingers together. His grip was a vow and a threat, a promise of both safety and control. He turned and, pulling Chloe gently but irrevocably along with him, began to walk toward the main exit, utterly disregarding the frozen tableau of the gala guests and the gaping, devastated Marcus. If you've ever wished someone strong would step in when no one else would, someone who wouldn't just defend you, but would claim you with the kind of power that silences the world, make sure you like this video and subscribe. It's for every woman who deserves a protector, more dangerous than her enemies. Now, let's see what happens when Chloe realizes what it means to belong to the Mafia boss. The transition from the blinding lights of the gala to the cool, quiet interior of Matteo's black armored sedan was jarring. It was like stepping from a screaming nightmare into a silent velvet cage. Chloe was shaking, not from cold, but from a profound mixture of adrenaline, terror, and a strange, thrilling sense of safety she hadn't felt since she was a small child. Matteo didn't speak a word until the car was moving, gliding away from the St. Regis, escorted by 2 identical black SUVs filled with silent, granite-faced men. The security was immediate, overwhelming, and utterly serious. He finally spoke, his eyes still fixed ahead, watching the passing city lights. "You are safe now, Chloe. But you must understand the gravity of what just transpired." His use of her name, without being told it, sent a fresh shiver down her spine. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice fragile, barely a thread of sound. "Why did you do that?" He turned his head slowly, and in the dim light of the sedan, his eyes were pools of impenetrable shadow. "Who I am is irrelevant. What you need to know is the why. Marcus Sterling publicly humiliated someone I intended to protect. In my world, that is not an insult to you. It is a challenge to me, and a challenge must be answered with dominance." "But why me?" she pressed, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "We don't know each other. I'm just—" She trailed off, unable to repeat Marcus's ugly words. "You were the victim of a public betrayal," Matteo stated simply, as if explaining a basic law of physics. "And your face, in that moment, showed the kind of vulnerability that is not only dangerous, but deeply wrong to leave exposed. You have a quiet strength, Chloe. I saw it. It deserves a stronger shield." He leaned closer, the forbidden intimacy of his proximity making her breath catch in her throat. "More importantly," he murmured, "Marcus Sterling has been skimming off a few of my investments. He's been an annoyance. I was waiting for the perfect, most public way to crush him completely, taking his former conquest, claiming you as my own, and therefore destroying his reputation and his financial standing in one move. It was exquisite leverage. You were a perfectly placed piece on my chessboard." The raw, pragmatic truth of his words should have devastated her. She was a tool, an object, a means to an end. Yet somehow, it wasn't as painful as Marcus's rejection. Marcus had destroyed her out of pettiness. Matteo was using her out of strategy and ruthlessness. There was an honest, unvarnished quality to his ambition that was paradoxically less hurtful than the soft lies of her ex-fiancé. "So I'm a pawn?" she asked, tilting her chin up, trying to meet his commanding gaze without flinching. A rare, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "A pawn, Cara? Never. You are the queen, the most valuable piece. You have been claimed. You belong to the Moretti family now. That is the reversal. You have gone from having no protector to having one that the entire city fears." He paused, letting the weight of the statement settle. "And that requires a performance. For the next few weeks, until Marcus is financially and socially erased, you will live with me. You will be seen with me. You will be what I told them you are. Mine. The word. Mine. It echoed in the small space, possessive and absolute. And if I refuse? She asked, testing the boundaries, a defiant flicker in her eyes. Matteo didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten her life. He merely looked at her, his expression utterly serene. Then Marcus will go back to humiliating you at every turn, reclaiming his narrative, and I will simply stop protecting you. My men will step aside. It is your choice, Chloe, but choose wisely. In my world, indifference is often a more lethal punishment than anger. The danger was escalating. She wasn't just safe, she was trapped, trading one cage for another. But this cage, had a terrifying dark beauty. What do I have to do? She finally asked, accepting the inevitable. Nothing but exist, he said, reaching out to gently brush a strand of hair behind her ear. This touch was entirely different. Slow, deliberate, exploring. The air between them crackled with electric tension, a palpable sense of forbidden intimacy. You will accept my protection. You will follow my directives. And you will allow me to erase the memory of that despicable man from your mind. He didn't mention affection, or love, or even respect, only erasure. The car pulled up to a massive, secluded mansion overlooking the water, a structure of polished granite and black glass that looked more like a fortress than a home. It was isolated, imposing, and undeniably safe. Inside, the house was a contradiction. Cold, clean lines, priceless modern art, but a surprising warmth radiating from a hidden, roaring fireplace. Matteo led her into the library, a vast room with walls lined floor to ceiling with ancient, leather-bound books. He moved with a practiced ease, shedding his tuxedo jacket and tossing it onto a chair, revealing the tailored fit of his black shirt, which did little to hide the powerful musculature underneath. You need rest, he commanded, his voice softening slightly as he looked at her pale, drawn face. You have been in crisis for too long. He snapped his fingers, and a woman, a silent, middle-aged housekeeper, appeared. Maria will show you to your quarters. You will have anything you require. Do not leave the grounds. Do not speak to anyone but myself and Maria. Understood? Understood, Chloe whispered, her mind racing. Maria led her up a winding staircase to a suite that felt like it had been designed for a foreign princess. The bed was enormous, dressed in pristine white linens. That night, Chloe slept for the first time in months without clutching her pillow, her body finally relaxing from the constant, low-grade tension of Marcus's slow abandonment. The knowledge that the most dangerous man in the city had publicly claimed her as his own was, perversely, the only thing that had made her feel truly safe. The next few days were a blur of high-stakes, escalating forbidden intimacy. Matteo was a man of routines and absolutes. Chloe was given clothes, a new phone, and a list of rules that were non-negotiable. Rule number 1. When we are in public, you will act as if you are completely, irrevocably devoted to me. Their public appearances were highly choreographed. They attended an opera, a quiet, exclusive dinner at a restaurant only accessible by private elevator, and a charity auction where Matteo's presence was a palpable force. At each event, Chloe was a prop, but a cherished one. Matteo's hand was always on her lower back, a possessive anchor. When he spoke to her, it was often in low, liquid Italian that no one else understood, the sound of his voice weaving a private, sensual spell. He bought her jewelry, not simple gifts, but show-stopping diamonds that spoke of staggering wealth and ownership. He didn't ask her opinion. He simply draped them around her throat, his fingers lingering on her skin, watching her reaction with that intense, unnerving gaze. One evening, before a mandatory public appearance, Chloe found him in the library, looking over a series of documents, financial statements, marked in aggressive red ink. He looked like a king surveying his empire. "Matteo," she began, approaching his massive mahogany desk, "I need to know what you've done to Marcus." He looked up, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. The cleanup. It was swift. All of his investments were leveraged against him. His partners discovered he was underestimating losses and overstating gains. They cut him loose. Your $50,000, by the way, has been recovered and is sitting in a clean escrow account. But his company, it is a shell. His reputation, dust. You You bankrupted him, Chloe breathed, a complex mix of shock and morbid satisfaction washing over her. I removed an infection, Matteo corrected, and I delivered justice for a woman who was too vulnerable to take it herself. She leaned against the edge of the desk. I wasn't vulnerable. I was just too trusting. I gave him too much. No, Matteo contradicted, standing up and closing the distance between them with that familiar, unnerving speed. You gave him your loyalty, a quality he was unworthy of, and because he broke it, I was given the opportunity to claim it. He lifted his hand and cupped her face, his thumb gently caressing the curve of her cheekbone. It was a gesture of such unexpected tenderness that Chloe nearly lost her footing. Your fragility, he continued, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, is a lie. I see the steel underneath. You worked for him for 5 years without a title, without pay, and you didn't break. You only bent when he snapped. That is not weakness, that is resilience, and I intend to cultivate it. The air in the library grew thick, heavy with unspoken desire, and the absolute danger of their connection. You don't have to do this, Chloe whispered, her eyes locked on the dark intensity of his. You don't have to keep pretending that I'm yours. But I don't pretend, Chloe, Matteo said, his voice dropping to a seductive, commanding thrum. The moment I touched you at that gala, the moment I spoke the words, the claim became real. You crossed a boundary you cannot uncross. My enemies believe you are my weakness. Therefore, you must be my strength. He dipped his head, and their lips finally met. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss of romance. It was a mafia kiss, possessive, absolute, and forbidden. It tasted of power and dark secrets, a sensual claiming that ignited a fire Chloe had never known she possessed. His hands wrapped around her, pulling her against his hard, imposing body, until there was no space, no air, no thought left in her mind except the reality of him. The kiss was deep, a vow sealed in heat and urgency. She responded not with fear, but with a desperate, pent-up passion, a release of 5 years of stifled emotion. She wasn't an accountant anymore. She was a woman in the arms of a lethal man, and for the first time, she felt truly alive. When he finally pulled back, they were both breathless. Matteo's obsidian eyes were alight with a fierce, burning triumph. You are no longer vulnerable, Cara, he stated, his voice husky. You are protected. The climax arrived 2 weeks later. Matteo and Chloe were hosting a private, small gathering, ostensibly a celebration, but in reality, a strategic display of Chloe's new status to a handful of powerful figures who needed to understand the new political landscape. In the midst of the dinner, a massive, muscular man known only as Silas, a known associate of a rival familia who had ties to Marcus Sterling's old network, made a surprise appearance. He was not invited. He was a piece of Marcus's old, desperate attempt at revenge, a final, dangerous move. Silas walked directly to Chloe, ignoring Matteo and his 2 instantly tensed guards. The boss tells me you're a pretty prize, little accountancy bird. Silas sneered, his voice a gravelly threat. He reached out, his hand massive and coarse, aiming for her face. But he also said you're damaged goods, easy to break. I came to see if he was right. The danger was peaking. Chloe froze, the humiliation and fear from the gala rushing back. She saw the sneering, animalistic contempt in Silas's eyes. She was a deer caught in the headlights, her old fragility momentarily asserting itself. Matteo moved. It wasn't a sudden, chaotic flash. It was a calculated, controlled eruption of violence. One moment, he was seated. The next, he was standing between Chloe and Silas. You lay a hand on her, and I will cut it off myself. Matteo's voice was utterly calm, but the words held a terrifying, absolute promise. Silas laughed, a thick, vulgar sound. Easy, Moretti. Just testing your pet. Matteo didn't speak again. He simply lifted his hand, a silent signal, and one of his guards, moving with the precision of a trained predator, slammed the butt of his handgun into Silas's jaw. Silas dropped to the ground, a heavy, dead weight. Matteo looked down at the unconscious man, his face a chilling mask of indifference. He then turned to Chloe, his expression shifting, his fury instantly banked. He gently placed his hand on the back of her neck, and guided her face into his shoulder, shielding her from the sudden ugly violence. "Do not look," he commanded softly. "It is over." He held her there for a long moment, allowing the tremors of fear to subside in her body. He hadn't asked if she was okay. He had simply acted, protected, and calmed. Later that night, the mansion was silent again. Chloe sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of the violence finally catching up to her. Mateo entered the room, having dealt with the cleanup, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his demeanor grave. He sat next to her, not speaking, simply radiating presence. "That's your life, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice still shaky. "The power, the violence, the need to own everything around you." "Yes," he admitted, his honesty stark and rare. "But what I own, I protect absolutely. I do not allow others to inflict pain on my territory. And you, Chloe." He reached out and gently traced the line of her jaw with his thumb, his gaze dark and intense. "You are my territory now. Do you understand?" She looked into his eyes, no longer seeing a savior, but a man, flawed, ruthless, yet fiercely loyal to his code. And that code included her. Her initial desperation had been replaced by a quiet, burgeoning strength, a resilience forged in the fire of his dangerous protection. She had been abandoned by a weak man and claimed by a strong one. She wouldn't be humiliated again. "I understand, Mateo," she finally replied, her voice steady and clear. "I am yours." He smiled, a genuine, private, dangerous smile that only she would ever witness. It was the smile of a predator who had finally secured his most precious, unexpected prize. He gently pushed her hair away from her face, his lips grazing her ear. This was the final, whispered reversal, the promise. "Good," he murmured, his voice a low, possessive vow that settled deep in her soul. "Because even when you were insulting the filth from your past, Kara, I have always known this. You were never meant to walk alone. You belong here, with me, and the world will learn that my queen is untouchable." And with that final whispered promise of safety, claim, and eternal protection, the darkness closed around them, sealing their fate.